The elevator was broken that morning, and that was the only reason any of it came to light. I remember standing in the lobby of my own building, the building I had walked into 5 days a week for 31 years, and watching the out of order sign taped crookedly across the elevator doors. The maintenance man, a quiet man named Lou, who had worked in that building longer than most of my staff had been alive, was crouched beside the panel with a screwdriver in his hand. I told him good morning. He looked up at me and then past me toward the stairwell door, and something shifted in his face. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, and his voice dropped so low I almost didn't catch it. "Don't go up the main stairs. Take the back service stairs, please." I almost laughed. I thought maybe there was a leak or a broken step. I asked him why. He just looked at me. "Please," he said again, "and don't let them know you're here yet." I didn't understand, but there was something in his eyes, not fear exactly, more like urgency, like a man who has been waiting to say something and finally sees his window, that made me listen. I nodded. He went back to his panel. I went around to the service corridor. I want to be clear about something. Lou was not my friend in the traditional sense. We exchanged pleasantries. I knew he took his coffee black and that he had a daughter in nursing school in Raleigh. That was the extent of it. He had no reason to warn me about anything, and I had no reason to trust a warning from him. But I did. And that decision, made in less than 30 seconds in a lobby that smelled like floor wax and old coffee, saved everything I had spent my life building. My name is Vivian Calloway, and I am 63 years old. I own a regional property management company in Charlotte, North Carolina. We manage residential communities, commercial spaces, and a handful of mixed-use developments across the Carolinas. My late husband Robert and I started it out of our spare bedroom in 1993 with 2 properties and one part-time assistant. By the time he passed 11 years ago now, we had grown it into something real, something with weight. After he died, I thought about selling. My daughter begged me not to. She said her father built that company with his hands and I should not let strangers dismantle it. So I kept it. And I ran it. And for a long time, I ran it well. The problem with running something alone for a decade is that you start to rely on the people around you in ways you don't always notice. You stop questioning certain things because questioning them means admitting you might not have the full picture. And when you are 60 years old and tired in a way that isn't about sleep, you start to trust the people who show up every day and seem to understand the machinery better than you do. That was how it happened with my operations director. I'll call him by his name, Nolan. He had been with the company for 9 years. He came in through a regional referral, sharp on paper, sharper in person. Within 2 years of being hired, he was managing vendor contracts, maintenance scheduling, and client renewals for our entire portfolio. I leaned on him, more than I should have, more than I knew. He never gave me a reason to doubt him. That, I've come to understand, was the most dangerous thing about him. I took the service stairs slowly that morning. They're concrete, utilitarian, nothing like the carpeted main stairwell we use for clients. My heels were wrong for it, and I held the railing and climbed in the particular quiet of a space no one decorates or thinks about. The offices are on the 4th floor. The service stairs led out near the supply room, down the hall from the conference room. I heard voices before I reached the door. The conference room sits at the end of that hall. It has glass panels on either side of the door, but the blinds are usually drawn from the inside. That morning, one of the blinds had been left slightly open, maybe an inch, maybe less. I pressed myself against the wall in a way I have not done since I was a child playing hide and seek, and I looked through that inch of space. Nolan was at the head of my conference table in my building, with a man I had never seen before seated across from him and two people from my own staff flanking the room. The stranger had a leather portfolio open in front of him. There were papers spread across the table. Nolan was speaking, but through the door and the distance I could only catch fragments. I heard the words acquisition. I heard the words current owner isn't aware. I heard my company's name. I stood in that hallway for what felt like a very long time. My chest was doing something I didn't have words for then and don't have perfect words for now. It wasn't quite fear. It was more like the particular sensation of stepping onto a floor you believe to be solid and feeling it shift beneath your foot. I walked back to the service stairs. I sat down on the second step and I put my face in my hands and I breathed. I need to give you the background so this makes sense, because it didn't make sense to me all at once. It came together in pieces. 3 months before that morning, I had hired a consulting firm to help me assess the company's long-term structure. I was thinking about retirement, not imminent, but not impossible either. The consultants needed access to our financial records, our vendor contracts, our client portfolios. I gave that access to Nolan because he managed those systems and because I trusted him. He interfaced with the consultants directly. He summarized their findings for me in weekly meetings. What I did not know, what I could not have known without reading every document myself, was that Nolan had been in contact with an outside property investment group for the better part of a year. They were interested in acquiring regional management companies as part of a consolidation play. They wanted the client lists, the existing contracts, the operational infrastructure. They did not want the name, the history, or the founder. What Nolan had been doing, slowly and methodically, was restructuring our vendor agreements in ways that would make the company easier to extract. He had renegotiated several long-term maintenance contracts to shorter terms, quietly, within his authority, with explanations I accepted because they seemed reasonable at the time. He had also, I would later learn, been feeding information about our portfolio and our pricing structure to the acquisition group for months. Not illegally, not yet, but right up to that line. The meeting in my conference room that morning was the handshake meeting, the moment before the offer was formalized. I did not know any of this yet as I sat on those concrete stairs. I only knew that something was wrong, and that I had walked into a building that suddenly felt like it didn't belong to me anymore. I called my daughter from the stairwell. Her name is Judith, and she is 36, and she is nothing like me in presentation. She is warm where I am careful, loud where I am quiet, but she is exactly like me in the ways that matter. She answered on the second ring. I told her what I had seen. Not all of it, because I didn't have all of it, but enough. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mom, don't go into that meeting. Don't let them know you saw anything. Where are you right now?" I told her I was in the service stairwell. She said, "Stay there. I'm calling Mitchell." Mitchell is her husband. He's a commercial real estate attorney. He's been in my daughter's life for 8 years and in my corner professionally for most of that time. When Robert died, Mitchell helped me restructure the company's ownership documents. He is not the kind of man who panics. He is the kind of man who, when you call him from a stairwell at 8:40 in the morning and tell him something is wrong, says very little and starts moving. He called me back 11 minutes later. He asked me two questions. Did Nolan have signatory authority over any company accounts, and had I signed any documents in the last 60 days that I hadn't fully reviewed? The first answer was no. I had kept that boundary at least. The second answer made my stomach drop because the honest answer was I wasn't sure. "Okay," Mitchell said. "Here's what I need you to do." What he needed me to do was go to my office, close the door, and not engage with Nolan or any of his associates until Mitchell arrived. He needed me to access the company's contract management system and download everything touched by Nolan's credentials in the last 6 months. He needed me to call our business attorney, a woman named Gail who had represented the company for 15 years, and loop her in immediately. He also told me something I want to say carefully because it mattered. He told me that Judith had been worried about Nolan for several months, that she had mentioned it to him in passing. Something felt off about a few vendor renewals she'd seen on a quarterly summary, but that she hadn't said anything to me because she didn't want to worry me without evidence. I sat with that for a moment, my daughter protecting me from worry while the problem grew. I am not angry at her for it. I want that to be clear. But I keep thinking about how the people who love us most are sometimes the reason we stay in the dark a little longer than we should. I don't want to make the next part sound like a movie, because it wasn't. It was 3 days of the most exhausting, grinding, nauseating administrative work I have ever done in my life. It was spreadsheets and contract logs and phone calls with Gail and Mitchell, and eventually with our accountant, a meticulous man who had never once been wrong about a number in 12 years of working with us. It was late nights at my kitchen table with reading glasses I kept having to clean because my eyes would not stop watering. What we found was this: Nolan had not stolen from the company. That was the first thing Gail confirmed, and it mattered because it changed the legal shape of what had happened. He had not forged documents or transferred funds or done anything that crossed into clear criminality. What he had done was subtler and, in some ways, harder to prosecute, but easier to stop. He had been positioning the company for an acquisition he intended to benefit from personally. The acquisition group had, we learned, offered him a senior operations role in the consolidated entity, with equity. He was essentially engineering his own promotion by selling access to a company that wasn't his to sell. The vendor contract restructuring was real and documented, the information sharing was real and documented, and one document, a preliminary letter of intent that Nolan had presented to me 3 weeks earlier as a routine vendor agreement update, had language in it that, if I had signed it, would have bound the company to a 90-day exclusivity window with the acquisition group. I had not signed it. I had meant to, had set it aside for a meeting that got rescheduled, had forgotten about it entirely. Nolan had told me it wasn't urgent. He had been waiting for me to sign it without reading it. Gail sent a cease and desist to the acquisition group on a Thursday afternoon. She was direct and specific about what we had documented, and she made clear that any further contact with my company through unofficial channels would be met with legal action. The acquisition group's attorneys responded within hours. The offer was formally withdrawn by Friday morning. Nogan resigned before I could schedule a meeting with him. He sent a 3-line email on Friday afternoon. I read it once and handed it to Gail. I will tell you that I sat in my office after everyone had gone home that evening and I looked at the framed photograph on my desk, Robert at the ribbon cutting of our first commercial property, 2001, squinting into the sun, and I talked to him for a while, out loud in an empty room, the way you do when grief has been sitting with you long enough that it stops being embarrassing. I told him what had happened. I told him what we were okay. I told him I was sorry I had let things get so loose. I don't think I was wrong to trust people. I think I was wrong to stop paying attention. There is another part of this I have to tell you, because it is the part that changed something in me more permanently than the rest of it. When Mitchell and Judith came to my house that first night after the initial calls had been made and the documents had been pulled, we sat at my kitchen table with takeout neither of us ate, and Judith said something I have been thinking about ever since. She said, "Mom, I've been asking to be more involved in the company for 2 years. You keep telling me the time isn't right." She wasn't wrong. I had been telling her the time wasn't right. I told myself it was because she had her own career, her own life, two young kids. But if I am honest, and I am trying to be honest with myself in a way I was not always before, the real reason was more tangled than that. The company was the last place where Robert was fully present for me. Every system, every process, every client relationship, he was in all of it. Bringing Judith fully in felt like the beginning of something becoming more hers than his, and I wasn't ready for that. I had been so busy protecting the memory of how things were that I left the actual company vulnerable to someone who had no love for it at all. I asked Judith if she still wanted in. She looked at me over her takeout container and said, "I've wanted in since Dad died. I just didn't want to push you." We start our official onboarding next month. I am going to step back from day-to-day operations in a way I should have planned years ago. Gail is helping us restructure oversight so that no single operations role can ever have that kind of unilateral access again. Mitchell reviewed every vendor contract personally over the course of 2 weekends, and he did it without being asked. I don't know what I did to deserve the people in my corner, but I know I should have leaned on them sooner. The week after everything settled, I went down to the lobby and found Lou replacing a light fixture near the elevator bank. I thanked him. He nodded like it was nothing, like he hadn't changed the course of everything by saying 7 words to me in a hallway. I asked him how he knew something was wrong. He thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "I've worked in this building for 19 years, Mrs. Calloway. I know who belongs in the conference room before 8 in the morning. Those men didn't belong there." 19 years of showing up and paying attention. 19 years of knowing the rhythms of a place so well that a small wrongness reads as an alarm. I thought about that for a long time afterward. I thought about how the people we look past, the people whose names we know only because of coffee orders and small talk, are sometimes the ones who see the clearest, precisely because no one is performing for them. I sent a letter to Lou's property management company, the firm that contracts him to the building, formally commending him and requesting that he be assigned to our location for as long as he wants the work. It was a small thing. It was the smallest thing I could do, but I wanted there to be a record somewhere that what he did mattered. If you had asked me 5 years ago what the greatest risk to my company was, I would have told you market conditions, interest rates, regional competition. I would not have told you the person sitting in the office next to yours who smiles at the right moments and always has an answer ready. I would not have told you yourself your own reluctance to look too closely at things that might force a change you're not ready for. I kept the company, I kept the legacy, I kept the client relationships that Robert and I built over 3 decades, and I kept the staff who have shown up year after year because this place means something to them too. But I almost didn't, and the distance between almost and didn't was a broken elevator, a man with a screwdriver, and 7 words whispered in a lobby before anyone else arrived. Tell me something. If you had been in that stairwell, looking through that inch of open blind, knowing what it might mean to act and what it might cost to stay silent, what would you have done? Leave it in the comments. I read every one. I keep coming back to Lou, not to Nolan, not to the cease and desist, not even to the relief I felt when the acquisition group withdrew. I keep coming back to a man crouched beside an elevator panel who chose to say something when he had every reason not to. That's the part that stays with me. I've thought a lot about what makes a person do that. Step outside the boundaries of their job description, risk being dismissed or ignored or thought strange just because something doesn't sit right with them. Lou didn't know what was happening in that conference room. He just knew those men didn't belong there before the building was fully awake. He paid attention. He acted on what he noticed. And then he went back to his screwdriver and let me handle the rest. There's a kind of integrity in that I don't have a clean word for. It's not heroism. He'd probably laugh at that word. It's closer to decency, the simple, unglamorous choice to do the right thing when no one is requiring you to. I didn't have enough of that myself for a while. I want to be honest about that. I let my grief become a reason to keep my daughter at arm's length from her own inheritance. I let my fatigue become a reason to stop reading documents I should have read. I let my trust in Nolan, which was real, which was earned over years, become a reason to stop thinking critically about what he was doing with that trust. None of those were character failures exactly, but they added up to something that nearly cost me everything Robert and I built together. What I've learned, and I mean really learned, not the kind of knowing you can recite, but the kind that sits in your chest, is that the people who maintain what matters are the ones who stay sharp, even when it's inconvenient. Judith had noticed something was off in those vendor summaries months before I did. She had the instinct. What she didn't yet have was the confidence to bring it to me, without evidence, without a full case, without certainty. And I had never really made it clear to her that I wanted her instincts, not just her certainty. We're working on that now. It's slower than I'd like and more uncomfortable than I expected, handing over pieces of something you've held alone for a long time. But I think that discomfort is the point. Growth doesn't feel like growth while it's happening. It mostly just feels like adjusting to something you should have done sooner. If there is anything I would want someone to take from what happened to me, it's this. Pay attention to the people around you who have no reason to perform for you. Lou had nothing to gain. That's exactly why he was worth listening to. And pay attention to the quiet warnings inside yourself, the document you set aside, the question you didn't ask, the meeting you let someone else summarize. Those small surrenders of attention are where the real risks live. I kept the company, but more than that, I finally let my daughter into it. That second thing, I think, is the one Robert would have cared about most.